Welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast. I'm your host, Ludo Miller, and I'll be interviewing tutors and thought leaders from across the tutoring landscape to inspire, inform, and motivate you to become the best tutor you can be. The Qualified Tutor Community is a safe and supportive space for tutors who love to learn and grow. We offer training, resources, ideas, and a chance to connect with like-minded tutors. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor Community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes. Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. Today I'm delighted to welcome on Martin Rowe, Head of Operations at CPD, Continuing Professional Development. Today we're really going to open up a discussion that we haven't had too much of on this podcast so far, but which has been a large part of our conversations as a team and with those external providers such as CPD that we've been working with since we began. Today we'd really like to get into why CPD is so important for tutors and so important in the tutoring profession. Martin and I talked recently about the need for making tutors aware that they are professionals in their industry, much like teachers are and much like many other sectors are. But traditionally, tutors have not been seen as professionals. They've been seen as stopgap workers who fill those gaps in knowledge of students as and when, and then move on to different work. But today, hopefully, we'll go some way to changing that. Martin, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's brilliant to have this angle on our approach and our discussions of tutoring. And I mentioned there, how CPD is so important for the tutor, and really that filters down to reassuring parents of quality assurance and giving students the best possible teaching and tutoring that they can, because that continuing professional development for the tutor percolates down to all areas of the tutoring environment. And talking of students, I'd love to open up, Martin, with what kind of a student were you, and whether you ever had a tutor yourself?
Well, what a wonderful question. I think I would point you to a TED talk to describe what student I was. It's by Tim Urban, and it's called Inside the Mind of a Great Procrastinator. So I think I've just described exactly the sort of student that everyone listening to this podcast will recognise. And whilst I'd love to come across as the perfect, rational student, learner, professional, I do suffer, like everyone else in the entire world, from the instant gratification monkey syndrome. So I am entirely dependent upon deadlines for everything I do. But I have adapted. Working in CPD and in other professions that I have, I've changed from that 24, 48-hour window to a deadline to collecting as a hunter-gatherer, as I probably am now, using Cornell notes, which is something we recommend for everyone. And if only as a student I'd have had Cornell notes templates to record my learning, it would have stopped my mother buying thousands of postcards from W.H. Smith in the vain attempt to turn me into a successful crammer by using those cards in some sort of shuffle as I entered exam rooms.
So she was trying to change the kind of student you were, perhaps.
Yeah, she didn't succeed, sadly.
Well, yeah, maybe that reveals something about what we're like inherently as students. But yeah, no, it's an interesting point there, really, isn't it? It's that it really reveals a lot, that question that we ask, because where our guests have come to in their point in their careers when we interview them is really can be quite a long way from who they were as students, but also can give a real indication. And considering all our guests are experts in their field, that gives a really kind of clear message to current students about how to go about their tutoring and how to go about their learning. Sorry, but perhaps that one is perhaps not so instructive. But Martin, it would be great to know kind of just to kick off this discussion with a little exploration of what CPD is, both the kind of the organisation you work for, but also the kind of the wider understanding of what that means in a professional sense.
Yeah, I can start with the last bit first, probably, and talk about what CPD is and how it came about, and then our gestation as an organisation, as the CPD Certification Service. CPD obviously stands for Continuing Professional Development, and it's a non-regulated sector. And we think it's been around from roughly the end of World War II, certainly in the UK, when we also think, and there's no definitive answer to this, that the Royal College of Surgeons, who, with the experience of surgeons in wartime, and then with the advent of the National Health Service, were the first body to adopt it to improve surgical outcomes by training surgeons to do the same thing in the same way and become consistent in how they performed, which is something that wasn't a feature in pre-NHS days. And that lead was followed by most of what you call the traditional professions, including other parts of the medical sector, law, accountancy, architecture. And today there are over 2,000 institutions that offer people effectively letters after their name for being a member of their particular august body. And CPD itself isn't about primary qualification. It exists to meet the developmental and training needs of professionals who use the outcome from learning in a CPD to retain and improve their right to practice in their profession throughout their working life. But of course, where individuals, and we're talking here probably about 80% of the working population, are not members of a professional body, CPD is exactly the same as training. So it has other outcomes. And we'll probably talk about those later. There is an international standard for CPD, 17,024, 2012, and that covers CPD for persons. And if you ever buy a copy of it, I think you should always put it by your bedside because it's a wonderful document to send you to sleep. And it covers CPD for persons, but not how to deliver CPD. And it's quite an odd thing for us that people who are responsible in the UK for ISO standards, there's the UK Accreditation Service who audit certified bodies, and the British Standards Institution is the official UK delegate to ISO. They're both members of us because we actually do something that's not covered by that standard. And it places us in an odd position of supervising CPD for any form of organisation which comes to us wanting to be able to improve the knowledge, which is the core of it, that they're presenting to their chosen audience. And whether that's a professional audience who are going to use a CPD certificate to help retain their membership of a professional body, or an employee or member of some other organisation who will use the certificate to enhance their career in some way. And the number of organisations that are out there indicates it works. They all work on different principles, but the CPD that's delivered should, in our opinion, have a consistency of professional outcome for the particular audience that it's seeking to address. And that's no different than many areas of education.
Yeah, I think that's the key point to point out, isn't it? Is that it's obviously has traditionally been in a certain number of sectors and has been a large part of education as well for many years, as you said. After this kind of architectural and those kind of areas of profession, but it's an important part really of all areas, and I feel like the recent discussions we've had about different types of CPD applications that have come in suggested it is really a widening kind of field, isn't it?
Very much so. I mean, to give your audience some idea of the breadth of topic which we assess for CPD certification, the most wonderful two that always spring to mind are, in my experience, cupcake making, which I'm sure is a valuable CPD skill for some people, to the other extreme, which was very important at the time, which was how NATO forces treat battlefield injuries.
Yeah.
And that at the time when NATO was very, very heavily involved in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we had a wonderful opportunity to help expose people who wouldn't have been aware of these treatments to how they could improve how they did things. It was challenging.
Yeah, well, it just really shows what continuing professional development sort of means, doesn't it? It really can be in any area that you are working in, any area that is a profession. And now, a brief word from our founder, Julia Silva.
If you'd like to hear more about the ideas we touch on here, or gain the tools to take your own tutoring to the next level, the qualification for tutors could be for you. This live online seminar is facilitated by industry experts who, over 4 Zoom workshops, will cover the foundations of teaching and learning and how it relates to you as a tutor. The workshops are full of rich discussions where you'll learn alongside other tutors and connect on a professional level. We will teach you how to be the kind of tutor every child remembers. Visit our community space at qualifiedtutorcommunity.org and sign up now for our transformative course. We'll see you there.
Yeah. And I think the next question is really important for understanding why that continues to exist in so many professions. So really, Martin, I'd love to ask, why is this continuous training so important?
Well, if we think of ourselves, we start when we're in education, we have some outcomes that are set for us generally at age 16 and 18. And if you go into tertiary education from, let's say, 21 onwards, depending on the type of course you're doing. But if you go down any of those routes, you can't stop learning. You have to continue. Now, if you are working in one of those professional areas, it's a must that you have to continue to learn to retain the skills in your profession. But if you're not a member of a professional body, you still have to continue to learn to retain your employability. Because those who fall behind are the first ones that are going to go out of the door. And in post-employment times, that is often called lifelong learning. And it's a continuum which starts when we enter school, preschool at the age of 4. And it really doesn't stop until somebody's screwing down the coffin. It certainly won't with me. And I can illustrate that in one simple thing. I was always told at school, originally by one of my maths teachers, that I was no good at maths. And I avoided maths, despite the fact that when I was doing a degree, I managed to get first in statistics. And I thought, I'm not rubbish at maths. I want to prove late in life, relatively, that I can do it. So I went and did GCSE maths in 12 months and passed, and I got a B. And I only got a B because in 12 months you can't do the whole curriculum. So I'm quite proud of myself for that.
Yeah.
Because it just illustrates the commitment that individuals can apply to any part of their personal and professional life to improve what they do. And by improving what they do, they have the capacity to improve what they do for others.
That's the key point there, really, isn't it? It's that mixture of personal development and professional development. And that professional development, as we mentioned before, kind of trickles down to those that they are serving, those that they are working with. And that's such a key and kind of selfless point, isn't it? Is that we improve ourselves to improve others. And that couldn't be more true than in the tutoring profession, where every single minute of the work we do is there to help the student that we're working with. It's really about their outcome as a student, isn't it? The best tutors give the best outcomes to their students, not just academically necessarily passing exams, but also inspiring that kind of independent learning and that love for taking on more and more learning. So that's a really important point there about training in general, the constant improvement of your skills, that continuous learning and progress, but also that helping others and how improving your own skills improves the outcomes for others. Now, I think that, just touching on tutoring there, I think where I want to take this now is kind of really follows that path, which is how is that training a differentiator? This is a word that you've used before, Martin, but how is it that training is a differentiator? And especially perhaps with regard to tutoring, how is it that training can be the difference between a good and a bad tutor?
I think training in itself, if you look at training, is really for people who are going places. And if you don't train, you're not going anywhere. So if you're a tutor, if you aren't continuing to improve and learn from experience, and then through CPD and the work that you're doing, the experience of others, you're actually going backwards. And you've got to consider that for tutors, if tutoring's about the student, why should the tutor stop improving? Because it's a professional activity that should be addressed in a professional way. And we should all be seeking every day to get better at the things that we do. To me, it's a self-evident truth. And I hope that people listening to this will feel that I've touched upon a nerve and that they'll take the appropriate action and sit down and plan and to improve, because that's what it will do for them as tutors. Teachers, of course, have to do it because Ofsted will want to see evidence of CPD. Tutoring is slightly different in its focus. It's one-to-one style, but there are things that the tutor can always learn to do differently according to the needs of the particular student, or better according to the needs of all the students that they come across.
Yeah, well, that's it really, isn't it? It's that combining that personalized style with that wider grounding in teaching and learning, that constantly improving your overall kind of service, isn't it? And that's something that we've really held very true as Qualified Tutor ever since we began, is that our main access course, the Qualifications of Tutors, gives tutors that fundamental grounding in teaching and learning, not necessarily specific to any subject or any age range, but including examples from certain subjects, from maths and English, and including examples from certain key periods in a student's life. So maybe 11 plus, or, SATs, or kind of GCSEs. So that's really what you're saying there, is mixing that wider grounding and then also improving your personalized approach. And that will come through experience. And part of that experience is really through that training. And, perhaps this is an area that's, tutors have heard before, and perhaps it hasn't for those who've never heard kind of the importance of this for their specific profession. It would be great to hear a little bit more about this point, Martin. But really, the question is a simple enough one. Why should tutors seek CPD?
It goes back to the original point about improving your performance in that role continually. That's the essence of CPD. And of course, the way we're working with you guys is that we're looking at the materials that you are providing to that audience who want to improve. And we're adding in our experience in the preparation and delivery of CPD itself. When we look at any of the material that you guys have got out there, or any of our other members, because we're a membership-based organisation, we have a team of 12 professional assessors. We digitally score everything that we see, and we provide improvement feedback on everything that we get. So when those tutors are doing CPD, they know it's been not just curated by somebody who cares, which is your organisation. They also know that it's been third-party assessed from the perspective of improving their longer-term outcomes. So they should definitely do it, but they should do it in a fairly structured way. Structured CPD is one of the many terms that's used. And in fact, I've developed a CPD taxonomy that I won't bore you with today. But doing it is a fundamental improvement point for every tutor and teacher who cares about improving the outcomes of the young people who are effectively in their care.
And that's it, isn't it? You have to be aware that the student's learning is in your hands. And that's something perhaps that tutors have struggled with before, because they feel that they are really only supplementary to the teaching that a child receives at school. And while that is true, while tutors are there to work with teachers alongside their main teaching, which is going to be in school, tutors are not just sort of supplementary gap fillers. They are there to direct the child's learning and to improve their ability to work well at school. That's another key point, is that if you inspire a love of learning in that 1 hour, 1.5 hour session you have with them once a week, they can go back to school ready and raring to go for learning. And understanding how to inspire that, understanding how to plan effective sessions, understanding how to measure progress so you can give effective feedback to their parents or to them directly. That is what you learn in CPD. That is what you learn in training. So really the relationship there is just being highlighted very clearly.
I think it's also very important now to bear that in mind in the context of the National Tutoring Programme that's just about to start to roll, because it doesn't say it in itself, but that programme should only be delivered by people who can do it professionally and who have a commitment to improving how they do it over time, even allowing for the fact that that programme is at a relatively small proportion of the entire student population. The entire student population can all improve by undertaking tutoring. And it would probably be an example for me that had I had a maths tutor all those years ago, I would have been able to put to the sword the comment that I was no good at maths.
Which has lived with you to this day.
Well, I know it. No, I also have proved it's not true.
Yes.
Mind you, Excel does help.
Well, there we go. Use automation as well. That's one of the keys, isn't it? Not so easy in tutoring. But Martin, just touching now on a really up-to-date, kind of topical area of tutoring, the NTP. That's brilliant to bring that into the conversation, because it is really directing tutoring everywhere in this country right now, and it's also launching tutoring into the kind of the national consciousness and raising the level and the understanding of tutoring, and that will inevitably bring about a greater demands for training and for professionalism and for regulation, which is, perhaps the word regulation isn't quite so exciting, but the word training and the word leveling up and the word kind of standards, those are words that tutoring has called out for many years, and finally seem to be kind of just turning over. But I feel I wanted to end with kind of looking ahead, and I wanted to ask you, Martin, what you think training will look like in the post-COVID world.
It's an interesting one, because we've seen a huge shift since March 2020, where up to March 2020, around about 35% of everything that we received to assess and certify was digital. And that's now in excess of 50%. And that reflects the fact that there's been a complete close down in face-to-face training, and there's been a complete close down in the conference sector, with authoritative speakers speaking to self-selected audiences. So I think we'll certainly see more digital. Nevertheless, there are a couple of things that we have to be mindful of, and it's something that we will be doing in the not too distant future, is addressing the difficulty of what I would call digital ageism. A lot of digital output will age, and we're going to be restricting our certification on digital output to 3 years in the not too distant future, because what we often see is that it's still up there in the internet, and it looks as though it's got the authoritative CPD certified logo on there, but to be honest, some of it may have become very, very passé, and we want to address that. At the same time, we also know that face-to-face has to come back, because where practical skills need to be developed, observed, assessed, the digital format will never do that. So we will see a slow return to face-to-face. Will it be as large as it is, or as it was previous to mid-March 2020? That's an open question. One would hope it comes back forcefully, because that means that the aspects of our general health and communities will have improved anyway, to allow that to happen. But I see more in podcasting coming along. I see digital platforms like Zoom, WebEx, and others coming out stronger. And it's going to be an interesting thing about how work changes, and in particular, how the education system is going to operate from September, and how we, as an office-based business, are going to operate in the future. Yeah. Because anything that we do, and we hope that that's true of all the people that we deal with, has to be focused on the health and welfare of the people in employment, not simply a desperate need to fulfill the rental demands of an asset.
Yeah, I think that there's some brilliant points really to round that off with, isn't it? Is that we have to be looking after the strength of kind of the businesses that we have, but also that those tech and online companies are really going to be at the fore. And in terms of education, as you mentioned, ed tech is something that is here to stay. We heard that in our podcast last time, and on the kind of the benefits of online tutoring. And we know that those systems will be part of the tutoring and education landscape for good now, really, and that's a really positive step. I know, for example, that Qualified Tutor was really the idea exploded because of this forced move to online training delivery, which is what really gave Qualified Tutor that step that it needed. And we know that training, as I'm sure you are well aware, Martin, as well, training will take this online kind of approach for really a very long time now, because it allows that training to reach areas that it perhaps couldn't have, and it also allows, it facilitates a lot of the training, especially if the tech is good enough for it to mimic face-to-face training, although it can perhaps never entirely replace it.
Of course, we stand right at the forefront of that, because we see annually more e-learning from different members using different e-learning platforms than anybody else in the world, probably.
Yeah.
So we can help people immeasurably improve their digital output if they give us the chance to do so.
Yeah. There we go. Well, that's there's the call to kind of to seek out that CPD accreditation, because it allows a third-party assessor, as you say, not only to give that mark to your training, but also to allow these expert assessors, as Martin has mentioned and is part of himself, to assess your content, to assess your material against thousands of other professionally accredited training sources. So, Martin, thank you so much for joining us. I really think there was a lot in there for those seeking training and seeking ideas and thoughts about whether they should turn to training, but also to tutors who have never perhaps been given that opportunity to seek out professional development in their sector. So I think this is a really important conversation at a very important time, because as the NTP rolls on, we need to ensure that the tutors that are part of it are professionally trained. So thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you very much for allowing me to talk to you.
Yes, and we will speak again, I'm sure, very, very soon. That continuing relationship that we have with CPD doesn't end here. If you are looking to, as a tutor, to join the conversation and seek out more CPD in the sector, then please do have a look at our website at qualifiedtutorcommunity.org and check out the conversations and the courses that we have on offer. Thank you once again, Martin, and see you all again soon. Thanks for listening to the Qualified Tutor podcast, where tutors share their expertise to support the tutoring community. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes below. We exist to connect, share, and learn with you, because tutoring is a small job that makes a big difference.